Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything is Gay, Even the Straight Stuff. I'm John McDonald. I'm here again with my fabulous, beautiful co host, Magnus, who I'm sure is so precious that a woman wouldn't kill you.
Good. I definitely hope not. I've got way too much to do, so I've got no time for inconveniences like being 6 feet under.
It's true. Although we are not talking about Six Feet Under this week, though that is a fabulous show. This week we are talking about. I went back and forth in my head on what to talk about. But at the end of it, I ended up going with something that I kind of fell in love with at the beginning of the pandemic, but it's a little bittersweet to have fallen in love with this, not just because of the content, but because of the people behind the scenes. So today we're going to be talking about Why Women Kill from 2019. I'm talking about season one. Season two is its own thing. So that would get its own show because it's an anthology series. So season one and season two are in different spaces with completely different casts. Um, Unfortunately, we won't be talking about Lana Priya today because she was in season two, not season one. But we will talk about Ginnifer
Yes.
Goodwin. So we will talk about Snow White.
So there is at least one good piece of Once Upon a Time Illuminating in this one.
Yes, and I was very excited for Lana Parrilla in season two. And season two is, I don't think it's as good as season one. Season one has a better
Mm,
pace. Season two only has one story as opposed to these kind of three bisected but intertwined stories taking place in one house in Pasadena.
mm,
Um, I think for me, Why Women Kill is really a celebration of TV because even though it happened on CBS All Access, a streaming service, and then moved to Paramount
mm,
Plus, the executive producer of it, most of the directors of it, most of the writers of it had TV, specifically kind of prestige sitcom credits. The
mm,
kind of creator of it and head writer, but not necessarily head director, Mark
mm.
Cherry, started his career on The Golden Girls and did personal assisting on Designing Women because he came to Hollywood when the writers'
Wow.
strike was happening. Um, so he has
Wow.
he has some pretty good TV bona fides. He wrote
Mm.
Desperate Housewives, which was a movement on ABC for quite a while. Um, yeah, I think the one downside to kind of falling in love with the show is then finding out that Mark Cherry is a log cabin Republican. Uh, but I think if you
Mm.
look in his work, you can kind of see where he can take queerness, but can kind of divorce economy from that and say, well, yes, there are rich gays, so we should consider their story too. Um, it makes me cringe a little bit having enjoyed the show so much knowing that, but he only really directed and has main writing credits on the pilot and finale. So a lot of the good stuff in the middle he didn't have as much hand in, except for producing it. So I don't feel quite as bad, but as I was doing my research and realized it was that Mark
Mm.
Cherry who received a Profile and Courage Award from the Log Cabin Republicans, I had to take a beat, felt a little cringe, and then said, "Well, it's too late to
Mm.
back out, so we're going to talk about it," because I think the story is still worth talking about. But knowing you just have to kind of acknowledge that and move through it.
Mm.
There's not much I can do about it. I can't go back to 2019 and take over the writing room myself or anything. So it is what it is. Lucy Liu also directed an episode in the middle of season one as one of the main actresses of the cast, and I think that's one of the better
Mm.
episodes of the season. So I'm really happy for all the people that were involved in this project, except for Mark Cherry, obviously. So
I can see why, and this comes back to a conversation we've touched upon a few times before about about various films and series we've watched, and like certain people being involved and how much their involvement sort of, I don't want to use the word taint because it's a very to my mind taint is a very strong
yeah,
word to use in this context, but I suppose sort of modifies your view on
Yeah.
something that you might have enjoyed previously. I felt kind of the same with Rocky Horror when Richard O'Brien started going slightly crazy
Yeah,
with some of his
it
viewpoints.
does color your view of things as a
Mm,
whole. But then there were reasons you were drawn to it in the first place. And just because there were so many
mm,
people in the writer's room and there were so many different directors, and there really wouldn't be a way to talk about TV without talking about, especially in the 2000s, talking about Mark Cherry, just because of how
mm,
prevalent Desperate Housewives was, that I can't ignore that this is the same Mark Cherry that helped write stuff on the Golden Girls and then Golden Palace, the spinoff. So like
it,
you can't ignore
mm,
that Mark Cherry exists and has a part in American television iconography. And really, the most we can do
mm,
is acknowledge and then move from that with that knowledge. Yeah,
yeah. Well, I mean, American television and dare I say, women women-led, um, dare I say, camp television in many
yeah,
aspects. Like, yeah, it become the more you think about it, and the more you start giving examples like this, the more it does become, you know,
yeah.
worse considering that. Um,
But I didn't want to denigrate. So Mark Webb, who
mm,
directed 500 Days of Summer and the 2012 Amazing Spider-Man,
mm,
and the dramatic film Gifted with Chris Evans as the single dad. He directed some episodes of this. David
mm,
Grossman, who has done things like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, CSI, Dead Like Me, Ally McBeal, and Malcolm in the Middle, also had some directing and writing in it, and so did Valerie Weiss. So it's kind of
mm,
like you have to take the good with the bad. Like there were so many different hands in it that I
mm.
can't just throw it away because of Mark
No,
Cherry. So
yeah, and not just the crew. Like, you start to have a look through the cast list, and there's so many recognizable faces from different parts of
yeah,
the entertainment world that it it almost becomes like a bit of an ensemble of talent.
yeah, and like Kirby Howell-Baptiste
Mm,
had just finished playing Simone on The Good Place when, or she was still playing Simone on The Good Place when Why Women Kill came out the first season. So seeing
mm,
Kirby Howell-Baptiste and Ginnifer Goodwin in a cast for me made me want to see it. Seeing Lucy Liu, who had been on
oh,
Elementary as kind of the
mhm,
first Asian Watson, it's a whole thing.
brilliant. I just want to put it out here. Lucy Liu is one of my favorite actresses. Like, she is up there on the top tier for me, and I've loved her in a lot of different things that
Yeah,
she's been in. And I'm glad when she gets moments like this, and this is no disrespect to her. I do feel sometimes that she can be overlooked in comparison to other actresses. If we go back to the really beautifully campalicious Charlie's Angels that she was in, sometimes I think she was overshadowed by Barrymore and Diaz a little bit, but that's just my opinion. I really do feel that she deserves a high spotlight as well.
I would not be surprised if she was overshadowed, especially for Charlie's Angels.
Mm,
Which the first Charlie's Angel movie is kind of incredible, really. Um, I think Lucy Liu as Simone Grove does amazing work in these 10 episodes. She only has 10 episodes and not even a full episode because it goes back and forth in the different eras.
mm,
She has 10 30-minute pieces to tell a story of this woman learning to be better after being a jaded, third married, a frivolously addicted socialite. And Simone's kind of strength in moving through this and accepting her husband's homosexuality in the 1984 piece, the way they dance together, the way she is quite shameless about loving fashion, the things
mm,
that she does for for Jack Davenport as Carl. at the beginning of the AIDS epidemic when people didn't even really know what it was or what it would do. I think Lucy Liu really is the reason why season one succeeds, followed shortly by Ginnifer Goodwin, but Carl and Simone, and even Tommy, who Simone kind of falls in love with,
Mm,
isn't it? It could have gone really a little too The Graduate, but it really is this idea of two people meeting, falling in love, and learning how to let each other go. And you really get the sense of that Lucy Liu took what she got from the script and just ran with it, no holds barred, and I think it was amazing.
mm. Oh, I'm not surprised that she has such a commanding presence that it's very difficult not to let your eyes sort of wander to Lucy whenever she takes on a role
Yeah.
and takes center stage on things, which
Well,
again is the reason
uh,
like why it's weird that she gets overshadowed sometimes.
yeah, well, and they dressed her so fabulously for this role. She wore
Oh,
things that were just peak 1984. She was
mm,
in Da Vinci. She was in Gautier. She
oh,
was in all of the big name designers of that time. There's the very striking, like, extra
mm,
shoulder pad thing. There's kind of a sharpness to her. She stands very tall. You're always aware of her and present in the scene. I think actually, if you kind of look at it, she's probably almost always in the middle of the frame or moving towards the middle of the frame.
mm.
Lucy Liu always know where she is in a scene. That's for sure.
Hmm, that raises a point I wanted to actually bring up during this conversation. The use of color within this series. There's so much striking, bold colors, and it's not just the one character that's using it. It seems to be like shared as a theme between all of the different female leads in the use of like
Yeah,
striking color.
I'd
Sorry, go
agree
on.
with that. And it's done in different ways. So in the 80s with Simone, it's done in stripes and it's done in sequins and it's done in that very 80s ostentatious style. In the 1963 with Ginnifer Goodwin as Beth Ann, they're still
Mm,
living as more of a 50s couple, even though they experiment with marijuana in one episode, and then they go roller skating as the most dangerous thing they do, sans the murder. Beth Ann does have an interesting color palette, but it's more pink. It's more considered traditionally feminine, a lot more paisley and flower, more structured. And then you get to Kirby Howell-Baptise as Taylor, and she's more in the 2019 current fashion.
mm,
I don't think they actually changed the color house, so I think it's still purple in the 2019, but in the 1984, the purple walls of the Pasadena mansion,
mm.
um, such an interesting choice, and I can't quite figure out what it was for, but it's an interesting choice, so I'm not mad about it.
Would you say so? Speaking about like the different free women that we
Yeah.
have, and the fact that the structure and the way the narrative's told is it flits back and forth between the three of them. Is there any would you say there's any clash because of the vastly different time periods and styles we're seeing? Does it ever feel disjointed?
No, in fact, I think it was purposefully jointed. The house is supposed to be the nexus for these three different stories. It always
Mm,
comes back to the house. You can kind of tell. I should have known it was Mark Cherry because it does have a kind of first season of Desperate Housewives, first season of Sex in the City. It Season one has these like weird kind of haunted, everybody in white. Speaking documentary style things happening at the beginning. It doesn't happen in season two.
okay.
And that's not part of the story. That's them just adding color to the world. It's a very like turn of the century thing to do. But even in the finale, when Simone and Carl are doing the tango, and we're seeing the other two stories kind of begin to wrap up in the way they do, in the violent way they do,
Mm.
because Simone and Carl's
It's-
story doesn't end violently. Um, If you haven't seen it, it's on Paramount Plus, and I really think you should. So if I spoil anything, I'm sorry,
Mm,
but the
mm,
story itself is good enough that even if you know what's going to happen, because they tell
mm.
you someone's being murdered in the pilot, so it's okay. Um, the really great use of this kind of bittersweet couple where assisted suicide is going to happen. Um, after a thing that we see, and I don't want to spoil episode 9 out of respect for the story. Um, but this tango that leads into the thing that Beth Ann decides to do, and the thing that Taylor does in saving Eli, they were they were three stories made to be told about different types of marriages and about the women in them and what they do to protect themselves or learn to protect themselves.
Mm,
Beth Ann spends most of her part of the season under a delusion that has caused her to really go into herself and become this really kind of fake porcelain woman, perfect 1950s housewife, trying to do everything she can for her husband. When her husband has spent the whole time gaslighting her about something that she finds out about much
mm,
really later on in the series that really colors the finale that you don't see coming, because we have to take the husband and we have to take her at her word. And the idea is, well, I killed my child, so I'm a bad person and I need to work on that and I need to make sure things stay a certain way. And that was not true. And the truth of what it is causes Why Women Kill in 1963 to be different from 84 and different from 2019.
mm,
But having the backdrop of all of the murders happening during this like final tango before helping your gay husband who had AIDS pass away respectfully so he doesn't turn into like a living corpse attached to a whole bunch of tubes in a hospital. It
mm,
is graphic and heartbreaking and so incredibly intimate. And it's something that was a very brave thing to do. It's still kind of this taboo about what was experienced in the 1980s, especially in the queer
mm,
community. And that's why I really wanted to talk about Why Women Kill, because yes, there's really cute stuff happening in 1963, and 2019 they're doing a polyamory thing, but I think that 2019 is actually the weakest of the three stories. The strongest one is 84 and about Simone and Carl.
mm. Well, unfortunately, it's rare that you get three parts of a whole, and each part is equally strong. There's
Yeah.
always going to be a, a weaker part, and it sounds as if the Lucy Liu story is. I almost wonder whether, considering the people involved within the series, whether someone had this idea that this is a story they wanted to tell between it for that time period and such,
Yeah.
and they found a great show to incorporate it in, and they started working on the other parts of the series, but this part was always sort of like the centerpiece.
Yeah.
And they tried to balance it with two other parts as well, but it's clear which one is the
Yeah.
the jewel in the crown.
And we did see a lot of Ginnifer Goodwin as Beth Ann,
Mm,
in the commercials and the promo. We saw a lot of Lucy Lewis Simone with Leo as Tommy. We really didn't
mhm,
see a lot of the Taylor, Eli, Jade triangle. And there are probably people that watched Why Women Kill that really liked the polyamory, liked the modern day, they liked the twist. I
mm,
enjoyed the twist. But for the most part, it felt very self-insertive. The ideas that Eli is a screenwriter, but Taylor is the one carrying the marriage, and she's the one that wanted the open marriage. So it's like the most progressive one. But at the end of the day, it becomes about drug abuse and a love triangle. And except for a scene
mhm,
where Taylor's sisters talk to her about how an open marriage can't work, there's not much going on in that third act that I
mm,
gravitate back toward. It doesn't have the same kind of it's not as colorful in a lot of ways. It doesn't have that same kind of aesthetic draw. because in the modern era we mix so many decades. So something that's clearly 1980s, referencing a specific time
Mm.
period, clearly 1960s, referencing Mad Men.
Mm.
It's a much stronger aesthetic, but it's also Beth Ann's storyline, Beth Ann trying desperately to get Rob's attention, to have him fall back in love with her, befriending
Mm.
befriending her husband's affair partner, befriending the neighbors, and then standing up for a neighbor in abusive marriage. Like Beth Ann's strength is very compelling because you don't
Mm.
expect it. And when things go wrong, because they do, she tries so hard to become like the sexually liberated woman for her husband. And it actually ends up in one of the funniest scenes in TV where she's trying to gratify him and he ends up falling out of a shower and like being injured as she's trying to make him happy. And she also almost murders him with pimento and meatloaf, which is also why I don't eat olives in my meatloaf. But that is also just a personal choice that I make. So
Death by Meatloaf.
yes,
This that's that could almost sound like a sorry, my mind's wandering
yeah.
into strange directions.
Well, and it's an ongoing bit too, because at that dinner conversation with the meatloaf, she's
mm,
actually like, and I'm thinking about wondering when you're going to die. And he's like, I feel great. I'm not going to die anytime soon. And she tells him the story about a friend's husband who did die choking on a pimento olive. And then the end of the bit is that there's pimento in the meatloaf, and he does almost choke. It's a good bit. It's
mm,
higher art than what SNL would do, but it's a really good bit. And it
so,
brings
mm,
a lot of the 1960 through Ginnifer Goodwin stuff does
mm,
feel more humorous than heartbreaking. Um,
yes.
and then the 1984 stuff, in a way, is humorous but does tend toward more heartbreaking. And then the
Mm,
2019 stuff is supposed to be humorous yet heartbreaking, but I still struggle with the 2019 stuff. Like I want to like it as a whole thing, but I think that the modern era is where it falls apart because it doesn't have that aesthetic pull. And as much as the characters are trying so hard, it really does seem more sensational than anything. Like it
mm,
really strongly wants to be like polyamory and threesomes, and this is our mission statement, and it never quite makes it there on its own. So
mm. Uh, I was going to comment, Jennifer Goodwin, she's a really good choice for that style of housewife from that era. Like her aesthetic, her if I remember correctly from her role as Mary Margaret in Once Upon a Time, she is able to bring across a really convincing and authentic motherly housewife energy to her roles. But then in terms of like that sort of hidden depths, like she really clearly showed it whenever Mary Margaret like showed that Snow White was very much alive in her, even though they were sort of like almost like alternative versions of each other. Um, it's strange. They're the same person, but at the same time, like it's almost like Snow White in the Enchanted Forest and Mary Margaret were different variants of each other in different settings and such. But anyway, in a sense, you could see how Jennifer brings that across into this role, and it really does work. And portrays a very convincing um talent then
yeah,
with what
and
she does.
I think it helps too that the rest of the cast in '63 was strong, and she wasn't
Mm,
carrying it. Rob Stanton isn't playing abusive. He's not playing a buffoon. He's just playing a guy looking for excitement. It doesn't go so far in one direction. I don't feel bad for Rob. I think Sam Yeager plays him so you don't have sympathy for him, but he's not like so corruptive and angry. He is manipulative, but
mm,
really his manipulation ends up being more heartbreaking than angry. Alicia Coppola is the unsung hero of 1963 as Sheila Mosconi, the Italian neighbor wife, who is the dramaster and who would have
Mm.
been in place in Desperate Housewives, and Sadie Calvano as April, who Rob is having the affair with and who gets
Mm.
pregnant, but has this dream about who she is. And she's so kind that Beth Ann can't come to hate her because she goes to
Mm.
like see her in episode 3 because she finds out who she is. But she's so nice that Beth Ann actually befriends her. And that really sets up the rest of what is going to happen because now we have the Hitchcock syndrome. Do you know what this is?
The Hitchcock syndrome?
Yeah, so this is a
I
thing.
don't know. Go
Yeah,
on.
so this is a thing that Hitchcock really did in America first, that no one had really done in movies before like this.
Mm.
Where I can't remember which Hitchcock film it is, but there's one where there's a table and there's a bomb underneath, and
Oh,
you show the audience the bomb, but the characters don't know it's there, and so the audience gets that tension of it and
wow.
they're waiting for it to go off. And so this kind of Hitchcock tension, teasing, the audience knows something not every character knows, really, especially in the 63 piece. Because there's not really, in the 84
Mm.
piece, nothing is hidden, but in the 63 piece, this Hitchcock tension of Beth Ann has befriended
Mm.
April, but April doesn't know who Beth Ann is because Beth Ann pretended to be Sheila, and then April is having Rob's
Mm.
baby, um, while Beth Ann is in mourning for the child she lost. It's a whole thing where there's
Yeah.
everyone knows everyone else, but they've all been lying. And so there's that Hitchcock tension. When is the bomb going to explode? And the bomb ends up going off in the finale in kind of the best, most unexpected way because April shows up and it really does seem like she's going to ruin everything Beth Ann has been planning. And then you get they do this great thing with the tango in the finale where it slows down all three of the worlds. And so you're getting Carl and Simone doing this fantasy tango, Beth Ann watching what happens, and Taylor saving her husband. And you get it all in slow motion at the same time as the tango is happening. So it's like three very
Mm.
fantastical stories wrapped up together and
Mm.
going the same speed finally.
Yes.
And I think it works. It works really well both in cinematics and for kind of a slow release of that tension, the slow explosion of
Mm.
the bomb, as it were. And I think it works really well too, because in the finale, it really is about the partners. You don't really see Tommy, you don't really see Jade. April is left at that point, so it leaves it down in the finale to the relationship. It's not about the
Mm.
extraneous elements of it. And I think it's great in that it takes it from the beginning of the series where the ambulances are pulling up and so there's this really big like neighborhood, everybody's watching what's happening, and it
Mm.
pulls into the intimacy of these two people and what they want and what they can have. And for Beth Ann, it's a freedom, it's a reclamation of motherhood. And for Simone, it's recognizing how much she really loves Carl, even
Mm.
though physically they're not compatible. Um, and it's about Taylor becoming her own superhero and, saving her husband from essentially someone feeding his drug addiction. Um,
Mm.
and it's this really great thing where I think if they'd given a little more aesthetically or in some way to the third section of the story, it would have been stronger yet. It's
Mm.
not strong. I think as far as TV goes, it's still pretty good TV. But I think if they had done it where each episode was
Yeah.
its own time period instead of doing it side by side, I don't think it would have succeeded.
Mm. I think there's something to be said about a word that you used earlier in our conversation, sensationalism.
Yes.
It kind of feels that you've got you have three different time periods. You're examining some themes that are relevant for those different time periods. Um, like the first era, the 1960s, the the concept of image and of being sort of like a perfect family, perfect housewife. Um, Fast forward to next era, to do with like identity, um, liberation, and people starting to find themselves and be willing to be open. And then you get to the modern era. What themes are popular at the minute that we can explore? And I suppose it kind of feels like an easy thing of like talking about, sexual liberation and non-traditional pairings
Yeah.
and like relationships, as it were. But because it's such a because it's a topic that many shows explore in like for in comedies or dramas and such as that, maybe that's why it maybe not doesn't feel so strong, because of the fact it is topics that have been covered quite a bit in contemporary
I
shows.
I also think
Mm,
the drug abuse portion of it weakens it
mm,
because the other relationships do have extraneous elements. They have
mm,
Tommy, they have April and the baby, but Jade is a kind of lying, manipulative, drug pushing woman is kind of an icky stereotype if you think about it, of this
mm,
like fever dream of a woman. But it also really doesn't let like they are authentic in their way, but it doesn't really feel as much of a dedicated story as the other two. The actors are not
mm.
bad in it. I don't think Reed Scott, Kirby Howell-Baptise, and Alexandra Daddario fail. It's just not as
Yeah.
strong. There's something about Beth Ann Stanton in 1963 trying to be a 1950s housewife and having Simone and Carl be so of their moment. There's nothing
Yeah.
futuristic about it. Like if you really wanted to go with the we're
Mm,
exploring eras things, having the 1960 feel even further away from itself and having the
mm,
1980 feel so current, 2019 still feels current, so it doesn't feel futuristic.
mm,
I wonder what it would have looked like to have done the 2019 and to have it really just been a story about love. Because
mm,
the drug abuse angle and the former abusive boyfriend is they're fine, but it didn't really stack up to me the way the other two stacked up. Like the
mm.
idea that this guy is just along for the ride and his bisexual wife has this like wild woman lover, it doesn't hold the same air for me. It's not
No.
bad and it does represent people that are bisexual, which I appreciate. But it just kind of feels it's kind of like the part of this where the narrator is a male for some of
Yeah.
this. There's an episode about the whole thing where we're seeing it from the perspective of a male neighbor. So it adds like a weird
Mm,
male voice to the narrative that it doesn't need to. Uh, it,
mm,
it just it's not bad. I liked Kirby Howell-Baptiste more in The Good Place. I felt she got more to do.
mm,
Um, I wasn't actively cheering for anyone's downfall, but it just to me didn't feel as important. And maybe I'll go back and watch it and it'll be great and I'll be totally eating crow. I would still work with any three of these actors. I just, if you really wanted to do
right.
something special, you would have taken the idea of Ibsen's A Dollhouse or taken the idea of Glass Menagerie or August Osage County and brought that forward because something like August Osage County, especially, really does push the boat out and really is more sensational. And it felt like they were trying to be sensational, but they played it safe, and it ended up not
Mm,
working. That portion
yeah.
of the story does feel the weakest to me. It's very much like the second season of Scream Queens, where
Mm.
they were trying to capture the magic and they just didn't really commit to the thing they were doing, even though they had more people interested in it this time. Yeah.
Mm. I do wonder if there is some slight influence from Desperate Housewives in the sensational aspect. Um,
Well, and Mark Cherry had spent all the
mm.
time trying to recreate Desperate Housewives. He'd done Devious Maids, he'd done stuff after the
Oh
Golden Girls, but
yeah.
before Housewives. So Mark Cherry's brand is this sort of Americanized telenovela. It worked for Housewives because you had 5 very different housewives in Wisteria Lane, or maybe
Mm,
6. One of them was dead. I can never remember. But they each
mm,
had different things they wanted, and they felt like very strong individual characters. Even the
mm.
narrator character felt strong enough to hold her own.
Yeah.
And I for life of me, except for knowing that Eli did screenwriting, I couldn't tell you what Taylor does. I think she's a nurse, or maybe she was like in some kind of program of some kind. I, for life of me, like I
Oh.
looked at the Wikipedia before this, and I could not tell you what she did, what she did for work. But it was enough to afford a mansion in Pasadena. Let me tell you what. Pasadena is a great setting for this, but I have to tell you, after having lived near the area where Pasadena is, there's no way on God's green earth Taylor and Eli are even affording a murder house in Pasadena. Like, that's not a twice over
Mm,
murder house is still going to be at least $1 million, let me tell you.
mm. That's a good point. So we're thinking the location's cursed, right? That so
No, the
some jealous
location
person.
is definitely cursed. That is a main conceit of this show, is that this is a location that bring because the tail end bumper is like the next family moving in after Eli and Taylor sell it. She discovers he's cheating, and like the last shot is like looking at a big box of guns that for some reason they have, and
Oh my
it's like
God.
the sound of a shotgun. So yeah, it is a cursed house, but it also just seems to bring it out of you. It's probably the purple walls. I think the purple walls might do it because that much dark purple on a wall can't be good for your brain.
They probably strip away all the purple and such, and it's revealed to be the sister of the Amityville house.
See, but you don't need a sister because in the Amityville lore, if you just take something out of the house, it becomes evil. So, like one of the Amityville movies was just like about one of the clocks or one of the lamps from the house that is evil and then it infects the new house. So you don't
Ah,
have to have the house itself, you just have a thing from the house.
there you go then. And this is crossover. We have confirmed that the Amityville film series is part of the same universe as Why Women Kill.
I would not be mad about that. So when we say everything is gay, even the straight stuff, there is a gay character here, which is really great, Carl. And there are some gay side characters because they show us a lot about the AIDS epidemic in '84, especially very close to the end to really make a point. Um, but there's also like queerness in each of the 3 segments, not just because. So she's an attorney, by the way. I looked it up. Uh, she is an attorney, which is for some mind-boggling reason the reason they can afford a house in Pasadena. But there's queerness in all different segments of these in the 3 different timelines, and also in
Mm.
kind of the jokes in between them when they have the people looking at the fire trucks coming up to the house. One of the jokes is that marriage is hard, murder is easy. And all of the episode titles are amazingly gay. Murder means never having to say you're sorry is the first episode. I'd like to kill you, but I just washed my hair is the second one. So there's some definite queerness going on in this show.
Mm. Yes. There's there, as you said, there's little lines, there's the fashion, the bold colors, it's a combination of different threads of aesthetic that all come together to do that.
Yeah,
Uh, but I'm thinking in myself, there's certain, dare I say, common experiences within each of the different eras that I think can really speak to a gay viewer as they're seeing this. So in the first era, there is keeping up an image, like during a relationship that's struggling, um, trying to find a way to get your man to love you again and such, and trying to portray this perfect image to the world. Um, I think a number of people can sort of relate to that. Then there's very much the second era with um, sort of kind of coming out and accepting yourself, but dealing with the social ramifications of that. And if you have been playing it straight previously or pretending to play it straight, and then dealing with the fallout with your partner and such. And then the last era of um dealing with like having a partner or yourself that wants to explore a different type of relationship that might not be um a, what a traditional heteronormative experience would be viewed as. In fact, thinking about it, there you could almost have a look at the first era represents the desire to be perfect with a perfect image. Second era, learning to come out of yourself and such. And the third era, sort of embracing your sexuality and your craziness. Hmm. I don't know if I'm reading too much into that.
I don't think you're wrong. I think there is a liberation element that all of these share.
Hmm.
They all come about it in a different tack, but they all have it.
Hmm.
There are some shades of First Wives Club here, not just because the title cards have that very
Hmm.
pop art 1960s feel, but it does have kind of the same idea of women taking charge of their various lives. It's much closer to First Wives Club, the book, than it is the film. Though it is quite humorous, I think the things the
Hmm.
women in Why Women Kill go through are slightly more um, than just being a divorced woman, which is still a big deal. But I feel like when we talk about Ginnifer Goodwin, especially in Why Women Kill, and I'm going to spoil this
Hmm.
because there's no other way to do it. Basically, she spent the entirety of everything before the show, after she had her kid, being gaslit about why her kid died. Her husband,
Hmm.
not necessarily malevolently, but also kind of malevolently, has been keeping the reality of the reason from her. And he bought her this brand new house so that she could have this new perfect life and so she could quote unquote get over her daughter dying. Literally,
Hmm.
that's what he says to her in the kitchen in that first conversation they have. They do this really great thing that happens in a chorus line in some versions of it as well, where they do the at the ballet song and they have like kids that look like the actors come out. So they have an episode where we see the women as like their younger, unrealized, unfettered selves dressing up for Halloween, which is really great. I would also say it's really
Hmm.
interesting in 1984, Simone and Carl aren't shunned by the country club because she's outspoken and a person of color. They are shunned
Hmm.
after they find out he's got AIDS and he's been having sex with guys in the steam room. And they get freaked out at him passing AIDS on to people.
Hmm.
So they're not necessarily shunned because he has AIDS. That is a part of it, but it's
Yeah.
also about the idea that that he can no longer be in the shadows is what he does. Because it's not that he's gay;
Hmm.
it's that he can no longer be in the shadows about it. There's no real moralistic thing here other than he may have infected other husbands in the steam room. But
Hmm.
according to Carl, that was happening all the time. So it wasn't actually that as big a deal. And also the scene where they get kicked out of the club, Simone is like, "Oh, they always stare when I wear Gavinci." So like she's not even processing the idea that this is about homosexuality. In fact, if anything, it isn't until the end of the season when she sees one of Carl's friends wasting away from AIDS and being surrounded by very little family, um, that it really hits her and she goes from
Hmm.
being this very not icy but very kind of stern in charge powerful woman, and you just see her and she can't even like she can't smile, she can't crack a joke. it's it is a difficult scene. It didn't wreck
Yeah.
me in the same way that Angel and Rent wrecks people, but like they really didn't pull punches about this. If anything, they probably undersold it slightly because the reality of how ravaged a body with AIDS did look in 1984. Like, if anything, they probably had to undersell it, but it's still so intimate and heartbreaking. And knowing the journey that Simone was on, really makes you understand why the 2019 has less impact. Because yeah, drug abuse is
Mm,
bad. Yeah, getting out of a domestic. The other part of it is that we find out that Jade has been lying, so her real name isn't even Jade. So all the stuff about her boyfriend being abusive that she was running from, she was lying about.
mm,
So it also kind of devalues the I'm looking for a new life path thing that we could have had with Jade in order to give it
mm,
faux sensationalism. Um, yeah, it's one of those things where 63 is great because it's so lighthearted. There was a reason it was such a focal point of
mm,
the commercials for it. Like if you look up why women kill stuff on YouTube, a lot of what you're going to get is between Beth Stanton and then like the one-lining, biting, acerbic wit of Simone Grove. But Beth's story is a story about heartbreak and grief and recovery.
mm,
And it's so it's hard at times because she's basically doing everything but screaming at her husband, "Help me." The scene of her like walking downstairs naked after he's like, "I don't even notice when you buy a new dress, even when you spend a week allowance on it." She comes down naked and they play it for laughs because his like boss is in the room, but it's basically Beth Ann screaming, "Look at me and look at this pain I'm still going through. Why
mm,
don't you feel this pain too?" And it's an amazing moment of bravery, and there's a reason Ginnifer was cast in the role, and I have to imagine it's
mm,
because she has that ability to play a character like that.
mm. Indeed. There's almost think about it, there's a strong element then of appearances within that section
And
of
keeping
the
up
story.
appearances, keeping them up, if you might say. Yeah, the she finds out her husband's cheating because people are talking about it behind some soup cans in the supermarket, and then she like crashes into them in a very like there's an episode of Mad Men when that legitimately almost happens to Betty.
Mm.
It's very much an homage to Mad Men in a way. It's also a take on the idea of the iconography of the American supermarket as a housewife's kind of center for a world in
Mm,
63. So it's also a really good callback to the era we're in and how people are just
mm,
that's the supermarket is also their social life, which is also a great call to the first Tales of the City book by Armistead Maupin, where Marianne Singleton's first introduction to singles life in San Francisco is being taken to a supermarket to cruise, being taken to a
mm.
Safeway to cruise, which no one should do now. It's a bad idea. San Francisco or anywhere.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you could be in the supermarket and you see some attractive dad, like, just wearing his casuals and everything. Like, it, I wouldn't necessarily knock it.
I mean, you can do that if you want to, if you want to go up into an Aldi or a Trader Joe's. I just wouldn't do it in a Safeway.
Oh God, Trader Joe's, what a name.
I don't even know if you have if you have Trader
No,
Joe's.
no.
And they make Oreos that we call JoJo's, and they're like 10 times better than regular Oreos.
Like
Um,
names like Walmart and what's the other one? Is it Target?
uh, yes,
Those are
Target.
magical.
Yeah,
Here in the UK, those are magical names that we only hear over the television box.
well, we don't have Tesco's, so Tesco's is the one that we hear over the
Ah,
box. And there is a Trader Joe's in Canada called Pirate Joe's because they don't have Trader Joe's in Canada. So the guy comes down across the border and buys all the things from Trader Joe's and then takes it back up to his store across the border to sell. So it's called Pirate Joe's up there.
that's amazing.
The JoJo's are very good. Let me tell you, they're worth going across the border for.
The JoJo's, you say? Oh yes, but JoJo's Bizarre Adventure has always been a favorite of mine.
Yes.
Sorry, I know we're getting off a tangent here. Let's reel
Uh,
it back in.
yeah. So there are some second second players on the show that are really good. I mentioned Tommy Hart,
Hmm.
who is the kind of 18-year-old, 19-year-old that falls in love with Simone. Simone originally isn't really into the relationship. She's not into having casual sex with him. but he's like, I've been in love with you since I was 13. And it's only after she discovers that Carl is gay that she
Mm.
then pursues that relationship when he's of age. And so there's a really interesting kind of wink and nod to The Graduate as well in a different way. There is also Lee Jun Lee, who plays Amy Lynn, I believe, who is Simone's um, daughter from previous marriage. And it sets up an amazing dining room episode where everyone's sitting around a table in a restaurant, and then everyone gets so angry all the secrets get revealed. So they find out Carl is gay, and then they find out someone's having a baby out of wedlock. It just really cascades. And so you have a really humorous moment with that. Sheila Mosconi, the acerbic next door neighbor who's Italian, which is literally how Beth Ann describes Sheila when they meet. Rob asks what the neighbors are like, and Sheila says they're Italian, um, which in '63 is hilarious, but today is cringy and hilarious. Um,
Mm. Quick
yeah.
question. That chap that Simone falls for, was he a busboy or something?
No. So Tommy, Tommy has like an artist streak. He ends up being a really famous painter in like the flash forward, but like he has like a van, and maybe he works in, yeah, he does work in catering, I think. But he's like 18, 19 in 1984, so there's no pressure for him to succeed having come from a wealthy family, because no one was having that conversation in 1984 about people in wealthy. Let me tell you what. He's there to be a love interest and to bring kind of youthfulness out of Simone. He kind
Mm.
of plays that role of the fantasy character from Fast Times at Ridgemont High, where um, the guy's fallen in love with the mom or something like that, and it's very much a fantasy built up in the head. Tommy Hart plays kind of that boy toy fantasy character role, only it actually gets
Mm.
consummated and they fall in love, and she teaches him the thing where they say goodbye, where she's like, I'm so glad you're telling me you love me first, but you're going to tell other women that. It's such an amazing sentiment
Mm.
to see what their relationship is like. He's also the catalyst for her trying to be a better person, trying to not be so snippy and judgmental. So he does play kind of a fantasy character, but there's not really another way to get Simone to a better place with Carl, because Carl
No.
is also a very snappy upper class character. So you actually need
Yeah.
a Tommy Hart, really.
Mm. Almost as if you're having a character that still has sort of a you I'd say a youthful, innocent look on the world, and for someone that's jaded,
Yeah.
sometimes you need that sort of exuberance for life in a much more simplistic way than sort of like having that sort of cynical outlook and such. And
Yeah.
uh, I dare I say that for some bizarre reason, it makes me think of Queer as Folk in a sense. Um, because you had the relationship between, oh, I'm gonna get the names wrong now, Brian and Justin, wasn't it?
Uh,
Am
it
I?
was Brian Kinney and I want to say Justin. Justin sounds right. I think it started with a J. They were not my favorite pairing in the show, but that yes, that sounds correct. People will know who you're talking about. Brian Kinney and then the blonde boy Randy. Randy something plays him in the American version.
Mm. Uh, l- If I remember their development, it was he was a very like hard-going, like alpha gay male, could have whoever he wanted and such. But the relationship with Justin slowly changed him over the seasons for the better in many ways. Um, I see a sort of comparison there.
Yeah, and there are comparisons also within the show. Some could argue April is like that for Beth Ann as well,
Mm,
because she kind of has this pure and easygoing thing. It's almost a hard because April learns that Rob is married, though she doesn't know it's to Beth Ann until the end. So
mm,
there's an element of fantasy in it. There's an element of fantasy to Jade, who is the partner that Taylor brings in to her and Eli's marriage. But that goes
mm.
south. because Jade isn't being honest with who she is, so she doesn't really get to be more than a fantasy. In fact, she gets punished essentially for lying in the course of the show, which
Mm,
may not be the greatest message, may be a very unintended sour note within the symphony. But yeah, there's a tradition of fantasy characters. I'm thinking of Anna Faris in House Bunny too.
yeah.
A little bit of Elle Woods and Legally Blonde, where it's this not quite, but it's this like fantasy character that comes in to be lightness and innocence and changes
Mm,
the jaded people. You see it a little bit in Mean Girls, a little bit in Heather. It is sort of this trope of this innocent, naive person that gets imprinted on, that gets changed, that has to make a choice. Um, but Tommy and Simone change each other for the better.
mm,
Um, Tommy learns to become more serious. He becomes more adult because of Simone, not just because of the sex, but because when he shows up bearing like a Casio sports watch from 1984, she looks at the watch and goes, "No." And also, it's great that you're talking all this, but you're riding a skateboard like a kid. So if you want to be adult, you have to approach me as an adult. Um, they have a
mm,
great conversation while he's literally changing his wardrobe, where they're in a department store and she's like
mm.
buying him a wardrobe for a vacation that they never get to take. And he's like, I can get these khaki shorts. They have all these pockets. And she's like, for what? Are we escaping to the Alps or something? It's a Sound of Music reference. Because they're going to Austria, they're going to Europe. Um, and there's this really great way where he brings out kindness in her. It's not just Carl,
Mm,
because Carl obviously needs help, but Carl is also experiencing, getting to date as a gay man for the first time, meeting
mm,
Hector again, which is someone he had been in love with. And it's very much that Simone and Tommy are able to be what they need in that space, but Simone knows enough to let Tommy go. She has enough
yeah.
wisdom that she can actually say, I can be your first love, but don't make me your only love. And it works. It works really well.
Yes.
Uh, Really, it's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this because you don't see that much on television. Usually you see it as the cautionary tale, you see it as the Lifetime movie where things
Mm,
go too far. And this has that fantasy element of having that nice ending to it that you don't always get. Um,
mm.
Also, Lucy Liu has sex in the back of a van that's kitted out to look like a love shack. I mean, it bears repeating. Tommy's living this like 18, 19-year-old male fantasy, which by the way, you could never get away with if this was two queer guys outside of Queer as Folk, because
Yeah.
people in theater, especially where I've written something where this did like a coming of age story with consent, I got like straight audiences just slaughter people when they do that. Like they hate it. They
It's,
think it's just not appropriate at all, and they just don't get how it works. But here, I think if it had been Carl and Tommy, it wouldn't have worked as
no.
well because the audience of CBS wouldn't have gotten it, even though it was something Queer as Folk was doing. The
Mm,
British Queer as Folk did it, and that's why we had it here in the American Queer as Folk. But like,
mm,
it's very rare to show that. I think the Justin Bryan dynamic. And of course,
mm.
Justin Bryan had a lot of work they needed. If we ever talk Queer as Folk, I have some thoughts about Justin and Bryan.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
it's one of those things where Why Women Kill
Mm,
really is kind of escapism fantasy. It came out at the perfect time because it came out at the beginning of a pandemic where we needed the
mm,
escapism fantasy. And then season two just wasn't as good in spite of having as good a cast. And then season three, they ended up not making, even though a season three was kind of
yeah.
announced. And I was kind of bummed by
Mm.
that because I wanted to see who the cast of season three was at least going to be before I turned it down.
Well, yeah. From the sounds of it, they were trying to, as you say, recapture the magic, the spark that made the first season so memorable. Question, like, did they always intend it to just be a one season thing, or was it going to be always more than one season?
I think it was going to be an anthology series always. I got the sense that
Mm,
was important to them. I think it might have just been Mark Cherry. Desperate Housewives is really the only show he has on his resume that he's worked on more than one season of that I can tell. I think it's
Okay.
also just it went from CBS All Access one streaming service to Paramount Plus
Uh,
another streaming service. So the move between streaming services may have not helped it. I
mm,
also, except for Kirby Howell-Baptiste, Reed Scott, and Matthew Daddario, and I guess Lana Priya is potentially white passing Hispanic. It's a really white cast. I just got to
mm,
be for real and honest about it. Like there are some people of color. Robert Gant is in the cast who did play on the American Queer as Folk, but it is in a way overwhelmingly white. I mean, one of the writers was the writers from Frasier, and you don't get more white than that. So part of it is that it was always going to the, having CBS kind of host it was always going to mean it couldn't go as far as it may have wanted to go. Um, but also, unless you were really going to up the diversity in the next season, I have a hard time. I have a hard time figuring out who was going to watch this that couldn't find other versions of this elsewhere.
mm,
It. I think season one was fairly special. I think season two, if it hadn't stuck to one story and one timeline might have worked.
mm,
Nick Frost played in season two,
mm,
which is really neat. That's the same season that Robert Gant was in. Perry Gilpin, who was on Frasier, and Haley Hasselhoff. I didn't know David Hasselhoff had a daughter that was acting, but Haley Hasselhoff was in season two. So there was some really great kind of character actors, established people, but it just didn't really seem to find its footing. Um, I'm
mm,
curious to see what season three would have been, but I see no reason why it couldn't come back in some package. I do think the Simone and
mm,
Carl story was important. I do think the Beth Ann, Rob, and April story worked, but I don't know if it would have held a whole series itself. And then, of course, I've been very frank about how I feel about the Taylor Eli story. Not bad, but I if it
mm,
hadn't been there, I don't think I would have missed it. Um, yeah,
mm. In sense of it coming back, it's possible it could be. It could like be resurrected in some form. Um, there does seem to be some natural continuation to put it back in the same location in as before, since the at least the setting has a bit of identity to itself. Although I'm not sure how they would be able to tell a story, considering that they've covered um a few different eras already. It would
I mean,
probably have to be contemporary.
there's definitely enough women killing people everywhere,
Yes.
and there are movies like the one with Brad Pitt and Leo DiCaprio set in the '60s, and there was Bad Times at El
Mm,
Royale with Chris Hemsworth, so there's a stomach for it. Um, yeah, I think it's okay to let things go too. I think it's something we struggle with a little bit,
mm,
because we always seem to want more and we seem to want now. And I think that's why Netflix has trouble
mm.
like keeping up with things, and they have trouble with renewing things, because they want stuff that's going to be a sure hit, but then they don't want to renew for the second or third
Yeah.
season, and it kind of
Mm.
adjusts too far the other direction.
I have many thoughts about Netflix.
Yeah,
It to keep it brief, I agree. I I think there's a massive commitment issue from Netflix in terms of storytelling. This whole thing of having one or two seasons of a story and then they just let it go, you then end up with just a graveyard of dead projects,
yeah.
and it's not a good look. And how on earth can you attract storytelling talent if it looks it's so easy for them to just discard you and not allow you to tell that story? Um, unless you're really big. I believe Neil Patrick Harris's Uncoupling series. I believe that was saved by another network, but that's probably because of the of his name brand recognition that was attached to it.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of the animations are not going to be able to have that same pulling power.
And I
Um,
mean, I've seen some stuff happen on smaller streaming services. So like for me, and
mm,
we're talking about half Halloween, I'm likely to be looking at something like Shutter or what is the other one? There's two of them. So Shutter is the main one. There's also one called, I want to say it's Bloodfest or something, which is trying so hard to be a competitor to Shutter, but it only works because it's attached especially to Amazon Prime. Um, there's a lot of really great stuff, especially in anthology work, that you see on Shudder because people feel more liberated in making horror
mm,
movies to do things out of the box. Like the Hell House series, which has three movies and is getting a prequel. By the time they're done telling the story, it'll have as many entries as Paranormal Activity. The
woo,
VHS series, the VHS series, which just released a new one last year, which I am absolutely phenomenally wild about. The VHS series was such a surprise, and of course they host all of the new Dragula and old Dragula stuff, except for the weird season one that you can only find on YouTube. So like as we transition from my birthday month, as much as I love talking about me, we are going to be working in May to talk about queerness in horror films and horror TV shows. And it's something that I love that we're talking about now. They actually did a Queer for Fear, a 4-part docu series about horror movies and the queer experience. That was fairly good. Left me hungry for more, as
mm,
some horror movies do. I look forward to talking about horror movies and TV specials with
mm.
you, and whatever we're going to talk about because we haven't decided yet. So.
Yeah. Well, I suppose we better get brainstorming. And perhaps I should end my part for this conversation by answering the very question that's in the title of the show that we've just been speaking about.
Yes.
Why do women kill? It's because men drive them absolutely barmy for different reasons. That's my
Uh,
take.
that's fine. I think for me, why women kill
Hmm.
is not so much a question as a statement. It's kind of like Mad Men. It's not a question, it's a statement. Um, the show does a really good job of showing the reasons why women would kill. We hear
Yes.
stories about like grandmothers trapped in marriages that poisoned their husbands because they were beating them, but those
Mm,
feel so far away and so distant. In 1963, having Beth Ann being
mm,
gaslit and going through this like silent grief and trying so hard to be attractive, there's so much good in that that you can work with, and having Simone watching Carl um, succumb to AIDS and weaken and cry out for help and having to be there and realizing how much she loves him as a best friend, even if they can't be lovers, is amazing. And watching how she kind of does fall for Tommy, even if she stops herself, and how Tommy gets to fall in love with someone for the first time, which is
mm.
something you don't see a lot of queerness in, sadly, because people, again, are really kind of afraid of that kind of story unless they're both 18-year-old twinks at a British boarding school, which I've seen. It is a thing. It's a very special little show. It felt like it was kind of made for people in the pandemic and people looking
Mm.
for something pandemic wise. And the question of why women kill is not why do they kill for me, it's how will they kill? Which I appreciate as kind of variant on that. Maybe when I become rich and famous, I will release something called How Women Kill, and it'll just be the secret third season of Why Women Kill.
Ooh. I shall have to hold you to that then.
Yes, please do. I think that'd be a lot of fun. I would have a lot of fun doing that. As I am doing for other things that I do, including I am starting up a tabletop game that is a kind of fake ghost hunting TV show. So I'll be doing like a why women kill murder mystery thing every now and then, which I look forward to.
Mm. Mm, oh, how you have to tell me more about that in our conversation, sir.
Yes, and I look forward to conversations about Halloween stuff with you in the future as May becomes half Halloween month, And then
Ooh.
I think in June we're celebrating you, if I remember correctly.
Me, little old me.
Little old you. It's true. Thank everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time for Everything is Gay, even the straight stuff. And as always, beware of housewives bearing kitchen knives.